Welcome and thank you for joining Ping and SailPoint's webinar, Secure and Expanding Remote Workforce with Zero Trust. I'm Kirby Orozco and I'll be your point of contact for questions or chat. You can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A panel. Before we start, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping rules. All participants will be placed on mute during the presentation. Please submit any questions you may have into the Q&A panel and we will answer them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. This session will be recorded and we will email you a link to the recorded version after the event. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Frank.
Thank you, Kirby. My name's Frank Bergoglio, and I'm going to be moderating the panel today. We have a very, very interesting conversation planned for you today and some great speakers. We'll be going over some of the market drivers of Zero Trust and IT modernization and digital transformation. And we have some roundtable discussion, and we'll talk about some best practices. And then at the end, we're going to leave some time for Q&A. I'd like to introduce the rest of the panelists. Wes, why don't you start off?
Hi, I'm Wes Dunnington, Field CTO and Senior Director of Architecture for Ping Identity.
Asanka?
I'm Sankajai Surya. I'm the CTO and SVP of Engineering at SailPoint.
Thank you. And as I said, I'm Frank Bergoglio, and I'm the public sector strategist and technical evangelist here at SailPoint. So to kind of kick us off and get us started, let's kind of review some of the market drivers. We're already seeing this exponential growth in users, information, systems, data, across the globe. Enterprises are adopting digital transformation, IT modernization strategies. This means a rapid adoption of cloud software, infrastructure, services at a pace we've really never seen before. Organizations are realizing the benefits, but there's a point where we have to slow down a little bit. Without the right visibility and control, all of this movement is going to quickly become a vulnerability and risk. We're facing new legislation, new standards, frameworks, policies to protect our sensitive keys of the kingdom. When we look at, some of the statistics over the last year or so, the increasing amount of breaches that have been reported, I think the number was 7,000 that we have. It's staggering. And we look at the billions of identities and sensitive data that's been compromised. What we're seeing is the perimeter, as we know, it's really dissolving, and the identity has become very, very critical. A little bit about Zero Trust, to kind of kick us off. The concept is not new. Some call it a movement, a model. In the last couple of years, it's been getting a lot of attention, mostly as a result of these breaches, but it's a way to move and handle the security required for this digital transformation. But as discussed, we know the perimeter is dissolving, as we open up our borders. So one approach is the Zero Trust model and an identity-centric approach to solving these challenges. In the model, no user is fully trusted. The identity, the device are continuously evaluated. So hopefully during our discussion today, you'll key in on some of our key takeaways about Zero Trust and identity-centric architecture. And remember, the identity is extremely important in this discussion. So Wes, if you could kind of talk about the paradigm shift that organizations are going to have to go through from the traditional network perimeter trust to a Zero Trust model.
Sure. So yeah, I think everybody remembers or is familiar with the classic, perimeter model where you have a firewall, everything outside of the firewall was untrusted, everything inside the firewall was typically trusted and often unauthenticated. I remember fighting like hell with people just to get SSL certificates or to use LDAP-S internally. So, as people are looking to move to hybrid deployments and all the other things that we can talk about a little more later, they're realizing that model sort of breaks down. So now what we're really doing is we're going to a model where there is no perimeter, or more properly, there's a set of what we'll call micro perimeters. So each resource has a protective shell around it, and there's a control point between any two things, and you're using the information. Everything has an identity. So an identity and an entitlement, whether it's a consumer or a customer or a partner or another, external API client or an internal service. And so you take those identities, you take those control points, and you build policy to decide what can get from point A to point B. And this allows you to bring in, more flexible resources so that it's not one big monolithic thing. It's very fine-grained.
Yeah, thank you. So to kick off, I had mentioned digital transformation, IT modernization. It means different things to different people. What are your views of digital transformation, and what challenges are your customers seeing? Asanka, do you want to start off with that one?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that we're seeing is, with the shift, last slide, with the shift to zero trust, one of the things is the core problem you have to solve is, what should a person have access to, right? When you think of the problem, we want to ensure, the principles that you outlined earlier is we want to ensure that people have access only to the things they want. But in order to do that, we need an authoritative way to be able to know what they should have access to. And that's where governance frameworks really come into play, is like, we need to really keep track of what people have access to, have processes to audit, so that we can enforce those things in a zero trust model. And that's kind of where this, you mentioned as a team sport, is governance is a key component of that zero trust model.
Yeah, absolutely. Wes?
Yeah, and I think one of the important things there is, it's important to remember that this is fundamentally a business transformation. You're trying to open up new lines of business, get new customers, outmaneuver competitors. So, start with your goals, and then, what do you want people to get access to? And then, as Asanka was saying, you're building policies and controls so that you're confident who these people are, what they can get to. But like I said, it should ultimately be a business-focused transformation.
Thanks. Yeah, all great points. So defining it in a zero trust model can be kind of a daunting task. Where should organizations begin? What's first in a zero trust strategy? Wes, you want to take this one since you were just talking?
Sure. So, I mean, as you said, there are a lot of different facets to this, and you're right, it is sometimes hard for people to figure out where do we start. So you really fundamentally want to start with the identities. I mean, can you get the identities into one place, or at least a consistently reachable set of places? Can you give people the right entitlements? Can you authenticate them consistently? And then figure out, what acts or what resources do you want these people to have access to? And if you build that framework, now it's really, okay, I'm plugging in this identity with these entitlements to this resource, and you can kind of build a line of sight from where you are to where you want to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. Asanka?
Yeah, absolutely agree. The core is really understanding your application environment, right? Understanding all the different pieces that are in your network and applications. And quite often that's going to be one of the more time consuming pieces, especially in a larger enterprise. You don't always, we sometimes think we know everything we use, but more often than not, that's not the case. And really doing that audit and understanding what's in place and who should have access to what is the fundamental core of where you have to start a process like this.
Yeah, establishing that baseline is absolutely critical. That enables us to then be able to detect anomalies easier and reduce that burden on the SecOps team, right? So in the zero trust ecosystem, I think we've established identity is critically important. Wes, do you want to take the first pass at kind of articulating where identity fits in the zero trust in fabric?
Sure. So, it says here on the slide, you can see identity is the fabric, and they're right. I also sort of consider it to be, it's the steel thread. Is you've got an identity and its entitlements, and this is the thing that is consistent as you move between, your different deployments, their different devices, the different applications and resources you want people to get access to. Because in this new world where, you know, a mixed hybrid and on-prem and different devices, it really is the identity and those entitlements that is that steel thread.
Yeah, absolutely. Asanka?
Yeah, the reason it's becoming so important today is that we're seeing, you know, attacks really change from what they used to be. We used to be in an era where the major attacks that we saw happening were product level. You know, someone attacked a specific product and got entry through the product. But what we're seeing now is industry has gotten a lot better at securing our products and doing the rigor of upgrading libraries and good product security. So we tend to get vulnerabilities much more so now from compromised laptops, you know, and social engineering attacks. And that's why zero trust becomes so important, because it requires us to really, really focus on knowing what people have access to. So in the event that someone's laptop is breached or someone becomes victim to a phishing attack, which despite all our best efforts, right, we read about these major attacks all the time, they're going to happen. And so the key is when it does happen, the zero trust model combined with identities regulating access lets that minimizes the blast radius of what someone's able to do once they gain access.
Yeah, and if I can expand on that, I think, you know, the interesting thing to me is I've been following and participating in this space for a long time is that attackers are running a business just like anyone else. So they're not particularly interested in trying to crack SSL ciphers and things like that. That's a lot of work. So what are they trying to do with the identity is to compromise that identity. And so, you know, what we're trying to provide is a way that identities are harder to compromise through intelligent entitlements, through intelligence of authentication and authorization. But identity is both the steel thread as well as the usual attack vector. So that's why it's so critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And good segue into our next question. You know, do you see zero trust as a business enabler? What's your point on that, Asanka?
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about the role of the IT departments today, you know, we have more and more tools coming online faster and faster. You know, users are demanding access to best of breed tools and SaaS tools, and they expect to get them quickly. And in a large, scaled organization, the only way to really be able to do that safely and have any idea what's in your application environment is through a zero trust model where you regulate your identities and your entitlements and know exactly what people have access to. There is significant upfront work in getting that established, but once those frameworks are in place, it really puts IT in the position to be able to very quickly add new applications to those frameworks. And as you know, the best of every group will say, I want this new tool. Nobody wants to hear anymore, and we'll get back to you in 9 months before you can use that SaaS tool, right? That's just not the way business works anymore. And making these types of investments allows IT to respond to those needs quickly and do it in a safe way for the enterprise.
You know, I'm laughing because you've pretty much said exactly the thing I was going to say is now that we've broken apart that sort of monolithic perimeter, you're much more agile. You can integrate in new, you know, apps or bring out new data from your own enterprise or integrate with a third party that provides a critical piece of your infrastructure. So it's making things much more finer grained, and it allows business to move faster, which is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. By flipping that perimeter around from the network to the application or the data, we're able to build those controls from the inside out rather than the outside in, which enables quicker application deployment and usage, and especially right now during our pandemic times, that's critical for a lot of organizations.
Yeah.
So that's kind of key into as organizations move to the cloud and we have more people leveraging our own devices and networks as we're doing right now. Those are some key things, but are there any others that organizations should be looking for?
Yeah, I would say one of the big things is bring your own application, right? We're seeing much more a bottoms up motion with a lot of these new SaaS applications today. Whereas previously, most applications that came into an enterprise, top-down enterprise sales cycles deployed out. But again, teams are rallying around applications like really quickly in small groups and saying like, this is amazing. We're using this in our division, or even smaller, that even within a small team, and they're getting into the enterprise. So in that context, identity becomes even more important because the enterprise needs to be aware of these applications and aware of what things people are using. So that I think is a key trend that's really pushing up the importance of governance and identity in the enterprise.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things there, because you bring up a great point, which is, people are trying to do things at the department or line of business level and not have to, wait, months and months and months for a central IT group. And that makes standards really important is, when, Ping and SailPoint are really big on contributing to and adhering to standards. So with this, you can bring in a new piece if it talks standards without having to do all kinds of custom integrations. And that makes the whole agility and mobility thing a lot more powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Multi-factor authentication has been, on that list of must-haves. There's been a lot of changes to MFA and access management single sign-on over the last couple of years. Wes, you want to kind of take us through how the industry's faring with MFA, access management, and SSO?
Sure. So, yeah, everybody realizes that any MFA is so much better than no MFA that there's just no reason not to get started. You'll protect yourself so much better against, account takeovers and phishing attacks and things like that. But then, people are getting more intelligent as their maturity is evolving. So like I said, phishing becomes a bigger thing. Now with, phones starting to support FIDO, we're seeing a lot of interest in FIDO because now you can roll it out to consumers as well and provide that really good phishing protection. So, they're really improving the security aspect. And then once people feel good about the security and they've got the audiences engaged using it, they come back to think about, well, gee, we also need to think about usability and reducing friction. And so you start bringing in intelligence. Why is this person who was in Austin now trying to log in from, Taipei? Why is somebody now, going through the system and accessing things they didn't normally? So, once again, we're trying to balance off the security and usability. And that's really the ultimate evolution of where we want to get to with authentication is as much security as needed with as little friction as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. You brought up a good point, tying into the intelligence layer, user behavior analytics, the SIM platforms, and actually being able to automate some of those responses where we should and kind of weed through those clouds is key to keep that frictionless access that we're all trying to achieve. Asanka, anything else on this that you want to toss in, maybe on analytics and stuff like that?
Yeah, MFA is I think it's basically just become a standard at this point, right? Like every enterprise you go to, you just have to do it. It's almost gotten to the point of like, just a basic username and password is MFA. Like I almost feel strange, honestly, these days logging into something and I'm not getting an MFA prompt. I think it's getting to that point where people and users actually feel more secure for having MFA deployed to their devices.
Yeah, absolutely. And we move beyond, the access management perspective. Let's talk a little bit about identity governance. What are some of the challenges that this new model or new approach, what challenges are organizations facing in their identity governance strategy or implementations?
Yeah, I think one major challenge is, a lot of organizations typically thought that governance was something only for large enterprises, right? If I'm not a massive enterprise, I don't need governance because I have single sign-on and that's enough. But as we saw from that zero access diagram that Wes showed us earlier, if you want to get to that and you really want to secure your applications and have the right entitlements, that only works with identity governance. So I think one of the challenges is we have a concept that previously we really saw being embraced by larger organizations being really driven down now. It's like, actually, no, these concepts are broadly applicable. If you want to secure your business, you want to be more agile, and in the face of increasing threat environments, be more secure. So I think the real challenge is that what we're seeing is what we previously seen at the large enterprise level is now coming down into many more organizations, and they're having to learn how to apply these techniques.
Yeah, absolutely. In my experience, governance was something that was, as you mentioned, a highly regulated industries where, a lot of audit findings and the audit was forcing the need for governance. But we're seeing, across the board, as you mentioned, large and small organizations starting to adopt this. And it becomes that critical layer. Wes, anything else you want to add on kind of from Ping's perspective, joining identity governance and MFA and access management, how all this comes together?
Well, you bring up a good point is, because we're all working to make this simpler and more approachable, and people are realizing it is a security best practice. I see we're democratizing it in a lot of ways. I see, smaller organizations adopting it. They may not have a legal mandate, but it's just the intelligent thing to do is I need to know who can get to what and be able to control that. And so, I just, like I said, as sort of like MFA, it's becoming more of just the fabric of how you do these things, which I think is great.
Yeah, the identity has definitely become operationalized. And I think that's a good segue into this discussion. Our communities have expanded. We, as we mentioned, we're opening the borders. We're embracing all these new technologies. But identity is no longer just about employees or contractors or even customers. We now have to consider things like APIs and bots. So could you guys give us a little insight into, other things you might be seeing or how all this, looks?
Yeah, go ahead, Wes.
Yeah, sorry, Wes. Why don't you take
no
this
worries. I know on my side, obviously, we talk a lot about securely authenticating people and things like that. But there's also sort of like the democratization. There's a lot more interest in identity proofing and verifiable claims about an identity. I was on a call recently with somebody who was at a really, really big bank, and they're like, yeah, I know somebody says they're that person, but how do I actually know that? And so once again, I think the intelligence and how these things all interrelate is getting better, which is really positive.
Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned around bots is a big change. Is like even the notion of what an identity is very much changing today, and our organizations are becoming much more fluid. There's a higher degree of outsourced vendors, contractors, bot users, as you imagined. And as you get these different types of identities and transient identities in your organization, it just drives up the importance of having really good governance. Because especially with bots and automations, not knowing what systems they have access to and what data they have access to can put you in a really tough spot.
Yeah, there's an interesting nuance there because, the bots do things in a different way. And so your analytics needs to account for them. So it is interesting as we add in all these new players.
Right, absolutely. Kind of going to switch now. We started to talk about this, and we brought up that it's not just the regulated industries any longer, but there's a lot of new regulations, GDPR, CCPA, the NIST cybersecurity framework. There's globally several new privacy and security frameworks that we need to address. What are some of the challenges that our organizations are having in meeting these specific requirements and regulations? How should they be looking at security as an enabler to compliance as well?
Yeah, I think one key lesson for me, and I tell a lot of people, is that GDPR and CCPA aren't the end; they're just the beginning. I think, when GDPR first came around, I think everyone in our industry was shocked at the level of work it took us to get through that. And then before many of us are done, then CCPA. But I think the trend is that regulation is going to increase, and it's actually we're going to see, I wouldn't be surprised if we see 10 more of these things in the next 5 years from different countries, different states. And one of the, anyone who's gone through these projects knows they are an extensive amount of work, like absolutely non-trivial. But investing in a foundation around identity governance and the things that you get from zero trust, it makes getting through these things easier. Your auditability is there, your understanding of access is there. It lays a foundation that hopefully will make every one of the successive, the next GDPR, the next CCPA easier for us to get through.
Yeah, and it's interesting from my perspective. What I'm seeing is that there's a good aspect in that GDPR and CCPA have actually made people start paying attention to what data are they collecting, where are they sharing it, things like that. So that's the positive. But the downside is, as Asanka was saying, this never-ending barrage of regulations. We're making development teams become compliance experts, and that's a big lift. So in terms of where we see a lot of interest is in providing a data-focused control plane so that the compliance experts can build the policies, and then the companies can be ensured that they're enforced consistently across their entire suite of applications, not requiring every dev team to be an expert.
Yeah, it's critical to remember, I hear this a lot. Even the most compliant organizations aren't necessarily secure. It almost gives a false sense of, yeah, we're compliant, so we must be secure. It's interesting. We did an exercise here at SailPoint where we mapped identity governance and the SailPoint platform to the NIST cybersecurity framework. And our findings of that were that in all 5 areas of the NIST cybersecurity framework, identity applied in a lot of controls over 3 dozen ways. And that's, that's key. A lot of people in the past haven't really given identity the credit due as an enabler for the compliance control frameworks. Mm-hmm. Sorry about that. It kind of stumbled. So we're going to kind of shift gears here and now kind of look at it from the threat perspective. Obviously, we kind of talked about this in the beginning a little. The ways into an organization's underbelly has grown exponentially, whether it's through different APIs, different user communities. What's your view on where the threat landscape is going? Want to take this one, Wes, to start off with?
Sure. So I think we already sort of talked about, this is sort of becomes a spy versus spy thing where it's like, we plug a security hole as a group, as an industry, attackers find the next thing. So, we keep, like I said, we've seen MFA, we've seen the attacks get more sophisticated. So I think that's going to continue. I think social engineering is a continuing, thrust of a lot of people. Also, as people are exposing APIs, those are maybe less mature in their protection. So I'll see people poking at those. Where I'd like to see us as an industry go is to continue to be more dynamic and more continuous so that, we're looking at more information, threat postures out there, IP reputations, all of the different things, adjusting the authentication, adjusting entitlements, all in a really continuous integrated fashion to, like I said, better trying to balance off the usability and the security.
Asanka?
Yeah, I would, like I mentioned earlier, I think the real evolution of the threat landscape is less focus on hackers and attackers who are trying to attack your perimeter directly, trying to get through your web servers, and much more of going after workstations, going after laptops and through social engineering. And as we mentioned, like reducing the blast radius is the key for when those things happen, because at the end of the day, we'll do our best and we should all be diligent to secure them, but those types of things will happen. And it's the investment in governance and zero trust type models that'll help prevent the damage from those types of attacks.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point because, as people are moving to microservices, you might have hundreds of them running, and there's this mantra that I always work with all the engineers, like the logging service should never be able to call the wire transfer service, because you don't want one small tear in your fabric to be that pivot that gets to everything.
Right, or an inadequately patched device. You know,
Yep.
we have a lot of conversations with our customers that are, you know, going down this path of device interrogation and device segmentation and you know, essentially what we're doing in identity governance is that continuous evaluation of the identity itself and its entitlements. You know, we're continuously reviewing suitability for a user, and whether or not they should or shouldn't have those entitlements that they do have, whether it's because their job role changed or they're, you know, moved organizations. So it's key where all of these tools come together. And that's kind of where we're headed next is, you know, I like the better together story. There's no one that can do this on their own. So, you know, would love to hear your points of view on the Ping SailPoint relationship, and then also, you know, what other tools may come into this as well. Wes, do you want to start off here?
So, I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, it is interesting since we, you know, often are in, you know, talking to the same people who are looking to solve the same problems. And because of our natures, you know, and the standards and the integrations, people like adopting these, you know, joint solutions. So, you know, I think where we go from here is, as we talked about, you know, bringing in more frameworks and extending the reach, because, you know, the application environments keep changing. I mean, you know, we've got Lambdas, we've got so many different external sources of identity, and how we tie all these together is very much a joint, you know, well, problem and opportunity for, you know, Ping and SailPoint together.
Yeah, and as Wes mentioned earlier, you know, our investment in standards and both being organizations that truly believe in standards, that's what makes this easier for our customers to be able to execute on. You know, we make that investment so that our customers can get the best solutions from both of us and integrate them quickly. So that focus on standards is something that's really core in both of our engineering cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. Being able to seamlessly integrate the platforms together without, you know, a large body of work extending the program to take 90 days, right, or 180 days to do. It really makes this, you know, easier for our customers. So I'm going to kind of hit some best practices here as we begin to wrap up. You know, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but, you know, there's some key things that we have to remember. You know, this is a team sport, as we set out in the beginning. We talked about there's no one product that solves all of the silver bullet for, you know, zero trust. Our communities expand. We need to manage those. We need to centrally manage authentication, authorization controls across the board. It doesn't matter where our data and our applications reside right now. So we need to put that border around the application, around the data. Forward-thinking organizations are adopting this model, but it doesn't stop with just the security team. It's the compliance team. It's the identity team. It's the operations. Everyone needs to come together here. So, you know, I think, you know, when we look at best practices, in my mind, a mature organization that has identity governance and access management implemented together is already very close, right? Anything that you'd like to add on the best practices, Wes?
So actually, you hit on a good point, which I don't know if we really hit on too, is you should always, data should be a first-class citizen. Think about protecting your data just as much as you think about protecting applications or protecting APIs, and think about the entitlements to be able to get to that data. And that gives you a much more flexible viewpoint.
Asanka?
Yeah, I think one of the best practices here is not to try and do everything at once, right? As we talked, there are layers to a zero trust model, starting with governance and network security, like all the way to your devices. And if you try and tackle the whole thing at once, it ends up being just an overwhelming project. It's really important to sequence these projects, understand the budget that's involved for them, and really plan for them to execute over time. It's more of a journey than a project that you go and execute.
Absolutely. I frequently can be heard saying identity is a journey, not a destination. It's an ongoing process, and we see even our mature customers that live that within their identity teams. And I think that's key in deploying a complex solution like this. You do need a team of folks that are all working together. Like I said, it's compliance team, meet security team, meet operations team, meet identity team. So we're gonna now head to questions. Kirby?
Yes, and as a reminder, everyone, you can submit your questions at any time into the Q&A panel. But we'll go ahead and get started with our first one. The current work from home push is essentially testing companies' readiness for a movement to a zero trust model. Given the light of the current situation, do you feel companies are meeting these requirements? And if not, how are you helping them adjust to those capabilities?
Yeah, I have I think a really relevant answer to this one. So when I joined SailPoint in the midst of the pandemic, the only time I've actually been to the office was when I interviewed, and by the time I came to start, our office was shut down, like many of y'all's offices are. The thing that impressed me was, for a company that was not previously a fully distributed or really a remote company, I had all my accesses that I needed to get started on day one, all the access to the right systems. It was all there. And that was the investment in governance that had been made, not for the reasons of being a distributed team, not for remote. That wasn't why SailPoint did it, but it just made that transition much easier. So we've seen similar stories from other customers who are on that journey, and the governance journeys. It was relatively quickly for them. Like, we had some customers that had to adopt Zoom very quickly and deploy it to tens of thousands of users very fast because of the governance capabilities that they'd already invested in for different reasons. And I think it's more and more companies are getting pulled in who maybe have not invested in governance and security the same way. They're realizing that with everyone at home, everyone distributed, it's much harder to secure their environments.
Yeah, and we saw something similar where, certainly the companies that were already well down this path, they scaled up relatively cleanly. I won't say, flawlessly, but they didn't have any major problems. It was really a lot of people who had a very tightly centralized control and, limited network ports and things like that, who really, I think this became a huge wake-up call to them that they needed a more flexible model.
Awesome, thank you. We'll go ahead and get our next question. Can you talk to the steps and measures to effectively transition into the cloud?
The identities and the workloads, that's an interesting point. Is to some extent, you're going back to distributed computing 101 is, where are your identities? How are they established? The entitlements, where are they authenticated? And where are your, policy enforcement points? So, like I said, really look at your identities and look at the resources you want to protect, and then connect the two in a secure manner. And make sure you've got the right entitlements in place so that we can enforce it. So those are sort of the writ large on how to expand your scope.
Awesome. We have a question here from the audience. How are SailPoint and Ping responding to the requirement of the ongoing monitoring and dynamic disposition of identity and devices?
Asanka, I know you were talking about some of the device monitoring and characterization, and I think we're both using a lot of that to build a more dynamic model, correct?
Yeah, definitely on the identity side, especially with our AI products today, we're looking to move from a model where it's all static configuration where we have models that are understanding user behavior in terms of what accesses are being requested, so we can be more dynamic in recommending access and giving suggestions on certifications, to optimize that process for users.
That's awesome. I have
I was just going to throw a little bit in there. I've worked with some of our federal customers that are working on a lot of device interrogation programs. They're looking at a couple different vendors, and where we're doing the continuous evaluation of the identity against policies, as I mentioned, we can determine that suitability of whether or not, once the device is interrogated and the user's authenticated to the network, we can use that context to then place that person on the right network and ensure they're getting the right access. So there's definitely tying these solutions together for device interrogation and user continuous evaluation of the user is very doable. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, and I mean, and we're always looking at contextual factors, IP reputation, geovelocity. You can add in those intelligence or those data points that help you build the policies that you want, that are dynamically looking at the overall, situation and context.
Thank you. I do have another one live from the audience. Can you speak to data level security, in particular monitoring access to specific record level data, such as accounts and customers?
So that's something that, Ping has spent a fair amount of time on. We have a product, data governance, that it's fundamentally looking at the data, looking at the requests, looking at the responses, and then applying policies to them to determine, should this person at this point in time from this location get access to the data? And it folds in the entitlements that, for example, SailPoint provides. So you can build that rich model that is focused on the data for control, consent, compliance, things like that.
We do have one more question. How does SailPoint manage user provisioning and entitlements, as well as promotions or lateral movements within an organization?
Well, can you repeat that question one more time?
Sorry, how does SailPoint handle user provisioning and entitlements, as well as promotions or lateral movements within an organization?
Yeah, so these are really just core functions of the SailPoint product and governance. And the key about governance is it's not a one-time activity. It really is about managing the users and the identity's life cycle. What would typically happen through a promotion is that an event is generated at SailPoint. We'll see that person's title has changed, and that can automatically generate a certification for their new manager to validate what their access is. So that's kind of built in, and really the core value proposition that our system brings is not that we govern your users and your identities on day one, but it's continuous throughout the life cycle of that identity. And that's where the real value comes in, because without that, you do a lot of work on day one, and then very, very quickly, it's of no use to you anymore.
Definitely. Thanks for answering.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I remember in the old days where you could literally go find somebody who still had $1 million purchasing authority from a role they had 10 years ago. And they were really good to know back in the day.
Yeah. When your context changes, your access should change, right?
Yes.
I would like to be in charge of that budget. Well, thank you all so much for joining the panel. If we did not get to your question, do not worry. We'll have a SailPoint representative follow up with you. Thank you all for your time today. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, audience. We appreciate all of our attendees who tuned in, and we hope you found this session insightful and informative. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to sales@sailpoint.com, and a representative will be in touch with you. As always, we will send out this recording to anyone who registered. Panelists, any last remarks?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.